Canadian truckers, you've been reading about it.
This Canadian freedom convoy, people don't like talking about it, do they?
Your country's in revolt. Do you know about this? Well, show this video.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views.
Honk, it will continue until freedom improves.
What I'm seeing across the country is people mobilizing because their governments have not listened to them for 2 years. They've been experiencing trauma for 2 years and no one is listening to them.
Welcome back to the Truth Factory. It's been a while, but it was time for me to come back and talk about the Canadian Freedom Convoy. This was formed in a response to the vaccine mandate requiring that truckers be fully jabbed in order to cross the land border between Canada and the United States. Those who refused to get jabbed would have to quarantine for 2 weeks after crossing the border, which is seemingly just another vaccine coercion attempt through threat of financial penalization by the Canadian Liberal government that is certainly hell-bent on destroying personal liberties of those who dare question the efficacy or legality of these mandates. And these mandates put an even greater strain on the already weakened supply chain, and they hint at a conspiracy that this might have more to do with the government's ability to track people than it actually does with public health, as we learned in December that the Canadian government had clandestinely tracked the cell phones of 33 million Canadians. And with a population of only 38 million, that basically means every single Canadian with a cell phone.
Last week, I wrote the Canada's Privacy Commission to investigate the reports that have surfaced and the request for proposal. I asked that an investigation be launched into the fact that PHAC tracked and collected mobile data of Canadians without their knowledge and their plans to continue this practice for up to the next 5 years.
They were able to do this because they bought the location and movement data from Canadian telecom giant TELUS. How in the Edward Snowden is this legal? It certainly isn't moral, and it's not just a theory. The Canadian government was caught and forced to admit this.
But it really boils down to the issue of consent, Madam Speaker. You can be as transparent as you want, but the bottom line is, you as a user, Madam Speaker, and a TELUS customer, if you didn't provide your consent for this information to be utilized in the manner in which PHAC did, then that calls into question not an issue of transparency, but an issue of, whether I'm confident in my privacy rights being protected at a time when I should be consenting to that information.
Any connection between this story and the gradual implementation of the Chinese-style social credit system in Canada is just a pure coincidence, I'm sure. Although from this information, we can assume that the government wants every Canadian to have a vaccine passport so they can track you from your phone, and who knows what they plan on doing with your personal data next without your knowledge or permission.
Yesterday, it was my first time ever crossing the border in my truck with my digital passport. And I held my phone up to the border agent to give him the QR code. You know what he said to me? "Oh, it's okay, I don't need it." So what do you mean you don't need it? He said, "Oh, your phone already popped up on my screen and is correlated with your passport." Can you think of that? Can you believe that? So they know everybody who's coming up to the border before they're there, and they're tracking them.
This is just one example of a legitimate concern about these mandates that the government just has not effectively addressed at all. And this is just a thought, but I think if you were an intelligent government leader who is already struggling with supply chain issues, you probably shouldn't piss off the very people who ship and receive everything into the country. And Justin Trudeau made matters worse when he called those who oppose the mandates a small fringe minority with unacceptable views.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians.
So the small fringe minority of thousands of semi-trucks drove from British Columbia with the world record-breaking convoy to the capital of Ottawa to oppose these mandates. The size of the protest is so massive that no one really knows how many people are actually involved.
We have kids, and we don't want them growing up in this world that you guys are creating, that Justin Trudeau is creating. That's it. No more lockdowns, no more mandates, kids back to school, nurses back to hospitals. Give us back our lives.
These truckers have vowed not to roll out until their demands are met.
Justin shows up, ends all mandates, everyone goes home happy, and we live in a free country again.
This is an absolute logistical and optical nightmare for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is currently shitting his pants somewhere and hiding in an undisclosed location that 4chan has already found and is probably already faxing honks to at this moment. Yes, Liar.com's Justin Trudeau, a man who has avowed his commitment to stand with Canadians during any crisis, no matter how dire, has fled the capital because he cannot stand to face illegal, peaceful, and resounding protest against his tyranny. Justin has taken Canada so far into clown world that the people's only response now is to honk back. The boosted Prime Minister has now said that he has COVID.
I tested positive for COVID-19.
You know, the disease that is so deadly that he was able to give a full press conference about how much he hates the truck convoy.
I feel well and have no symptoms.
What a coincidence that he gets COVID the same week that thousands of angry protesters descend upon Parliament.
All you people here today, all of what you're seeing here, this is not going to happen tonight on the 6 o'clock news, is it? You will not see yourself. You will not see how patriotic and beautiful and how you're waving all the right flags that I can see. You will not see yourself on the news tonight. And do you know how I know that? It's because I directed the news for 20 fucking years over there. The most misinformation that has ever been spread in the past 2 years has come from mainstream media. I don't know what the hell happened though in 2020. Everything changed.
Yeah, $600 million.
Yeah.
Now, I stopped listening to the media when I was a child because they tried to tell me that 2 planes brought down 3 buildings, and that's when I realized that it was all a CIA psyop. But of course in Canada, the media is no better, especially after Trudeau bribed them all in a $600 million bailout of taxpayer dollars.
Now, you sometimes hear about liberal bias in the media these days, how they're constantly letting our government off the hook for no good reason. Frankly, I think that's insulting. It's clear that they let us off the hook for a very good reason, because we paid them $600 million.
And that's probably why the state-sponsored media conglomerate CBC actually tried to put the blame on Russia as the true ringleader of this convoy.
But there is concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, but perhaps even instigating it from the outset.
You see, Russia's been very busy. Besides the US media pushing nonstop that Russia is about to invade Ukraine, they've also had time to infiltrate the Canadian trucking community and start a world record-long convoy that has been led by Putin himself. That's what they want us to believe. Trudeau calling these protesters racist is like the pot calling the kettle blackface. And according to Trudeau, the protest is also made up exclusively of Nazis and Confederate soldiers.
Here, the first day, Ground Zero, I actually spoke on stage. I actually saw the guy with a swastika flag.
So it was a real thing?
It was a real thing, but this is what they didn't tell you. He was going around with the flag saying, "Is this what you want for our country?"
Really?
This is what Trudeau is going to turn our flag into if we allow this draconian fascism to continue. Is this what you want the Maple Leaf to be replaced by? This is what we're heading to, people. And he was speaking with a European accent. So I'm thinking that he came from a country that knows about fascism.
There is this representation in the media and in the comments of other members, as if this is just a sea of people all waving Confederate flags or something. And that's just not what's happening. Objectively, whatever side you're on, that's just objectively not what's happening.
And as you can see here, there is a Fed LARPing at this protest and is being shadowed by what looks like a professional photographer. This guy glows so brightly you could see him from clown space.
The Confederate flag? That doesn't make sense that there's a Confederate flag in Canada. That's like the Japanese celebrating Thanksgiving.
Plans like this are used to change the narrative because it's easier to just blame Nazis or the Russians for your problems rather than self-reflect on your own mistakes.
Justin Trudeau, I mean, I thought he was kind of a cool guy. Then I started to read what he said, people who are not vaccinated. He said they don't believe in science. They're often misogynistic, often racist. No, they're not.
That was not smart of him at all.
Right. He said, but they take up space. And with that, we have to make a choice in terms of a leader as a country. Do we tolerate these people? It's like, tolerate them. Now you do sound like Hitler.
And at this point, Trudeau's broken record of the logical character assassination should fall upon deaf ears, as it's become evident that he will do anything to undermine his critics, as long as he doesn't have to stand and face them. Like here when he got triggered hard when asked a real question.
But I'm wondering if you, as the Prime Minister, need to engage with the fears and the concerns that others in the crowd raised about the vaccine. There seems to be a real concern for many of them about the safety of that vaccine. And I'm wondering if you are avoiding addressing that by only focusing on the much more hateful and nefarious elements of the protest this weekend.
The way we get through this public health crisis, get back to the things we love, is by trusting science, by trusting the facts.
And after this reporter asked this question, she was cut off immediately from asking any more.
Operator, would it be possible to put Marika Walsh on the line? She didn't get her follow-up.
We don't have Marika Walsh in the queue anymore, I'm sorry.
Thank you. This is what ends today's press conference.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone.
And I can only assume that she's on her way to a COVID re-education camp right now, which is, I'm sure, what happens to any Canadian journalist who actually attempts journalism.
Like, CBC has destroyed my life. Like, you should see the hit pieces, many of them that you guys have written about me. It's disgusting. I'm Kristen Nagel. I'm a nurse, and because of the hit pieces, you guys have totally, like, ruined my career. And I've been fired because of it. People have doxed my address. People have given me death threats because of the lies that you guys spread and the way that you twist the truth. And I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and kids have never been happier than what has been created here. Why don't you show that truth? Do you see the smiles in the kids? Do you know what has been taken away from them these last 2 years? Do you know 6-year-olds have told me they wanted to cut themselves and kill themselves? Kids want to die because of the last 2 years. Why aren't you showing that? And now you're talking about kids' welfare safety? Now you think kids should be taken from their parents out of these trucks? You're working with welfare services?
What they're showing, they're like,
but you're repeating it. You're repeating it. And people are believing it. Why do you think there's people out here counter-protesting? Why do you think Winnipeg, someone drove down 4 protesters purposely and put them in critical care? Why do you think there's actually violence and hate happening? Do you know how divisive this is? Yeah. Is this actually Canada? Do you know what you're reporting and what you're doing to the people out there?
Of course, if you don't agree with the government stealing your livelihood from you, you must be a racist who hates science. Not to enact Godwin's law too early, but do you know what other government loves science? Nazi Germany. They love science so much, we had to create the Nuremberg Code to make sure that no other country ever did that much science again. As you can see in the Nuremberg Code, it says that informed consent is essential, that you can't be forced or coerced into participating in a medical experiment, and you must have full information in order to make that choice. Although the Nuremberg Code is really only about medical experiments, and many would argue that since this drug is on the market to the general public, then it's no longer experimental. But that's not true, because the experimental and human stages of this drug have not been completed in certain demographics and age groups that it's currently being pushed on by the Canadian government. Also, consent to treatment is always required to receive a drug, and coercion like we're seeing with the mandates violates consent. So Trudeau bragging that nearly 90% of Canadians are vaccinated is like Harvey Weinstein bragging about how many women he slept with. We also don't have full transparency yet from the FDA, who tried to stall the release of Pfizer's approval documents for 75 years.
A judge in Texas has ruled that the FDA cannot take 75 years to release data about the COVID-19 vaccine, saying they got to make that info public in about 8 months.
The Canadian government is pushing things on its citizens without full data to back it up. For example, they've been saying that their science juice is completely safe to use during pregnancy, But when I personally called Pfizer to ask about the safety of these vaccines in pregnancy, I was told that they didn't actually know if it was safe, if it had any effect on the baby or breast milk, and that Pfizer had only tested it in one study in rats.
Healthcare providers may be using some outside recommendations in terms of, whether they are providing this to pregnant women. Basically, like you said, the safety and efficacy of Comirnaty in pregnant women has not yet been established, and it's unknown whether Comirnaty is excreted in human milk. A risk to the newborns and infants cannot be excluded. But Pfizer and BioNTech did perform a study in animals, and female rats were given an injection into their muscle. And the injection included the same amount of mRNA and other ingredients as a single human dose of Comirnaty. But then additionally, there is a clinical trial in pregnant women that is for the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine in healthy pregnant women 18 years of age and older. I don't have the information or data on that study at this time.
Okay. And so far, all that has been done to say that it is safe is a study that was done in a rat. In rats. Is
From
that
Pfizer, yes.
Pregnant
right.
rats.
So the only data we have is on these animals, is a study in animals. And then they also have this study that is in pregnant women and humans, but I don't have the data on that yet. So
Okay.
that's not in the prescribing information.
Okay. Is that data complete? Like, are they finished that study?
I am not sure about that. I can look into that a little bit further and see. It looks like they are still enrolling. It does have a link that says basically if you want to enroll in the study. So I don't believe that it would be complete if that is still there.
As a disclaimer, nothing in this video is medical advice, but this information is directly from a Pfizer representative. Yet the Canadian government is pushing this drug on anyone, regardless of personal medical history or objections, even though long-term effects and research on the safety and efficacy are not yet fully established. But once again, this is not about science or medicine or public health. This is about government control. That is what the trucker convoy is fighting for right now. And if all of the convoy demands are met, you can still have your weekly boosters if you want them. You can wear a hazmat suit if that tickles you. The nice thing about freedom is that it's for everyone, but it is a slippery slope when you give up your bodily autonomy to the government. Especially a government with an abhorrent historical record. Last year, unmarked graves of Indigenous residential school children made headlines. These deaths occurred because the government of Canada thought that they knew what was good for everyone and enforced mandates that led to the violation of rights and freedoms, as well as destroyed families for generations and caused the countless deaths of a minority group. We also shouldn't forget that they took away bodily autonomy in Canada from disabled people who were forced sterilized up until the 1970s. This was eugenics done in the name of science in Canada. So I'm sorry if I don't trust that my government has my best health interests at heart, based on their historical records for human rights abuse. This is what Corporal Daniel Bulford has to say about this. He's an RCMP officer who worked security for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for years and is now the head of security for the Freedom Convoy protest.
I cannot be compliant or complicit with federal policies and provincial regulations that I sincerely believe to be unlawful by every measure. It is certainly not the case that the official narrative has demonstrably justified a gigantic overreach into the fundamental freedoms of every citizen of this country. Look at our own history. Other stains on Canada, and the RCMP in particular, things that we have been a part of, carrying out so-called lawful orders. Orders to remove children from their homes to satisfy a government conformity initiative, or the registration and internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II. We're not immune to the stains of history. And I fear we may be repeating past mistakes. In our open letter, under the heading Call to Action to Commissioner Lucky, we have asked her to direct investigators to determine if any criminal acts have been committed in the dissemination of information from federal and provincial health authorities or public figures in positions of trust, thereby putting Canadian lives at risk.
I'll leave my healthcare decisions up to my family doctor and not the serial blackface performance artist Justin Trudeau, the same person who procured 400 million doses of vaccines for a population of only 38 million people. Enough for every man, woman, and child to get more than 10 shots. And even just with Pfizer alone, he's procured the option of up to 261 million doses until the year 2024 for 38 million people. Yes, the Great Reset advocator Justin Trudeau keeps saying that we need to follow the science, but I think we need to follow the money. Why did Trudeau spend billions of taxpayer dollars to procure redundant vaccines? If 81% of Canadians are fully vaccinated, why would he need tens of millions more doses for several more years unless it's always been the plan to force infinite boosters on Canadian citizens for years to come? Why else would we need this many vaccines? Can anyone answer this? Because I have called and wrote dozens of people within the Canadian government and I have still not received an acceptable answer. There has really been no disclosure of the contents of the vaccine contracts, including financial incentives, penalty clauses, indemnification obligations, and other material terms that would demonstrate whether the Canadian government has a vested interest in the outcome and uptake of the vaccination program. We know that Acuitas Therapeutics out of British Columbia, Canada, holds an agreement with Pfizer and Moderna for their nanolipid technology delivery system that is required for RNA vaccines to work. And there are rumors that the Canadian government gets an incentive or kickback because of this. It's currently unknown if anyone in the Canadian government has any financial interest in promoting any of the vaccines, but both Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer have both had to pay tens of millions of dollars in settlements in the past due to paid bribes and kickbacks to officials in foreign countries. And this isn't even getting into Trudeau's personal financial scandals that have been buried.
Nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. So you've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
How much?
has
Just the dollar figure.
Throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is
How much?
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How
as well.
much? I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me. And quite
You don't
frankly,
know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million, really?
So he's certainly not opposed to profiting off of immoral actions. Why else would he have changed his tune so much from 2018 when he said this?
We have to stand up for everyone's rights, whether you agree with them or not, whether they're good or popular or not. And the measure of a country has to be whether you take the easy way out because of politics or not.
Trudeau is supposed to listen to Canadians, and maybe he can't hear the honking from his undisclosed location, but they're not going away. And the Conservative Party hasn't been much better either during this whole pandemic, but at least the convoy protest sparked a vote to remove the Conservative opposition leader.
Erin O'Toole is out as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. O'Toole was voted out of his job by members of his own caucus on Wednesday in Ottawa.
Hopefully, politician Pierre Poilievre becomes the new party leader and eventually the new Prime Minister of Canada, as he has been a vocal adversary against Trudeau's corruption for years.
Trudeau thinks he's your boss. He's got it backwards. You are the boss. That's why I'm running for Prime Minister, to put you back in charge of your life. Together, we will make Canadians the freest people on earth.
But not only have these protests sparked leadership change for the opposition party, premiers of Western provinces such as Alberta and Saskatchewan have now come out in support to end the restrictions as well.
It means COVID is not ending, but government restrictions on your rights and freedoms, those will be ending, and ending very soon.
This convoy has done more in a week for freedom than any Canadian politician has done in the last 3 years. That's why the establishment is looking at this peaceful protest with thousands and thousands of people, and they're trying desperately to paint it as racist. Because when you're a hammer, everything has to be a nail. Which is why detractors in the media were pearl-clutching when protesters put a hat and Canadian flag on a Terry Fox statue, saying that it was defaced. Imagine how embarrassing it must be to have gone to school to become a journalist and then be forced to lie for a paycheck by saying putting a hat on a statue is a desecration. while turning a blind eye to every other protest that has done this. These are the same people who defended the actual destruction of dozens of statues, billions of dollars in property damage, and the actual murders of people during the Black Lives Matter riots, a protest that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau joined. He supports Black people so much that he's tried to become Black himself on several occasions. But isn't it amazing how the so-called anti-capitalists, who in the past claimed to be for consent and bodily autonomy, are now siding with big tech, big pharma, and the establishment? These are the same people who are constantly talking about doing our part so we can return to normal. It's just 2 weeks. It's just a mask. It's just a lockdown. It's just a vaccine. It's just a QR code. It's just a booster. It's just a little bit of spying by the government. Well, we did all that. We tried it your way for years. We gave up our freedoms in exchange for failed government intervention. And now it's time to actually get back to normal, thanks to the Canadian protesters pushing back against the man.
Yeah, I mean, Trudeau calls them violent. His MPs say they're terrorists. But today in court, the most a judge would give them is that they're enthusiastic horn honkers. And they've asked the truckers to stop honking at night. That's it. There was an opinion poll that showed 32% of Canadians see themselves reflected in the truckers. In our multi-party system, that would make them the leading party if the truckers formed a political movement.
This is the cleanest, most peaceful protest of the size I have ever seen. But of course it is. These people are not criminals. They're hard-working, tax-paying citizens who just want to be able to put food on their table without being financially coerced by the government-sanctioned medical tyranny trying to strip Canadians of their right to bodily autonomy and medical privacy.
You think they want to be here, Mr. Speaker? Those people don't want to be here. They want to be working. But that right was taken away from them. When is there going to be a plan from this Prime Minister? When is there going to be compassionate leadership to say, this is it. You've done the work. Here's the tools. We're moving forward.
We're going to bring you back to breaking news right now. That is the scene in front of Parliament Hill. Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is invoking the Emergencies Act to give the federal government extra powers to deal with these protesters right across the country.
The Emergency Act was not needed to settle the rail blockades of 2020, the Oka crisis, the crisis at Caledonia, September 11th, the COVID-19 pandemic, or any other dispute in Canadian history. The Prime Minister has not provided any legal justification for the use of the Emergencies Act, a historic unfettered power grab. He needs to calmly tell Canadians why he has failed and what is different today.
Trudeau implementing the Emergency Act is corrupt. This is a peaceful protest with minion bouncy castles. Like, does this seem like a national emergency to you?
Well, guys, it's getting worse down here. Somebody bought Connect 4. This is big time. We need help. Help! Look at you, Justin. Look what you did to your country. You brought us all back together, you idiot. Freedom!
But by implementing the Emergency Act and by painting the peaceful protesters as an unlawful blockade, the police can now freeze bank accounts for any donations to these truckers, and they can find people who have children at the protests. Clearly, they just want to get rid of the children from these protests so that way the police can use pepper spray and other violent crowd control methods without the optics of Waco. This could potentially get very ugly soon. But if the COVID measures that the protesters are fighting against were really needed, wouldn't the tens of thousands of unvaccinated protesters who have all been living in close proximity for 3 weeks be deadly sick right now? It's almost as if this has very little to do with the virus anymore, and that these mandates are just a political coercion tool to implement a digital ID system for Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum goals of global communism, in which our Prime Minister openly supports and is a proud member of. Conspiratorial or not, I think that is the obvious conclusion to what we're seeing. I can't think of a better reason for Trudeau to have doubled down as a dictator without a dick this week.
A lot of folks says, look, I just don't like your vaccine mandates and I donated to this. Now it's illegal. Should I be worried that the bank can freeze my account? What's your answer to that?
Well, I think if you are a member of a pro-Trump movement who's donating hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars to this kind of thing, then you ought to be worried.
Even MyPillow's Mike Lindell has been barred from entering Canada to bring pillows to the protesters because we wouldn't want a giant pillow fight at the border, I guess. Yeah, we better call in the UN to deal with this pillow crisis. And now the police are arresting protesters in BC who are singing "O Canada." What a bunch of national terrorists. You know, with all their unity and patriotism and love, we can't have that in Trudeau's Canada anymore. And if something doesn't give, this isn't going to get better. This is the last chance for freedom in Canada, which is why the protesters are holding the line.
How long do you plan on staying? As long as I have to. As long as I have to.
It's not like they can work right now because of these mandates, so what else are they going to do? And every day that they're sitting there, they aren't shipping or receiving any supplies to and from Canada. Soon the Canadians will go to their grocery stores and see empty shelves, and they will realize that Canadian truckers are far more important than the sniveling little shits like Trudeau that sit on their thrones in Parliament buildings and take fat salaries from Canadian taxpayers while they decide who can't work based on who has received a vaccine that profits the wealthiest people in the world.
People have been traumatized and they're mobilizing because they need some hope. They need somebody in this house of privilege to come down from our ivory towers and say, okay, little people, we hear you. So sorry we've traumatized you for 2 years. We're going to step up and we're going to give you some hope. Here's a deadline. The member opposite is laughing. The people in this house are incredibly privileged. That member has kept his job. Thousands of Canadians have lost their job. And he's laughing about his own privilege. What has he done to serve members that are marginalized during this pandemic in his community, Mr. Speaker, but laugh at them in this House of Commons? Shame on that member.
As things stand now, the Freedom Convoy represents the people of Canada with miles more integrity than its Prime Minister, who exemplified his absolute lack of leadership as he couldn't even muster the courage to face the protest against the medical tyranny that he imposed. We will never forgive or forget that because of these mandates, you spied on millions of Canadian citizens, you kept us from our families and our friends. Many people lost their job, and you fired healthcare and frontline workers who had been there from day one because of refusal of your vaccine mandates. Small businesses and livelihoods were ruined. Children were forced to be masked and educated behind plastic barricades and computer screens. The mandates exacerbated suicide rates, domestic abuse, and the opioid crisis. Many people died waiting for surgery or cancer because they couldn't receive a timely diagnosis. If we're really all in this together, then we're all getting out of this together too. And like the proud Canadian goose, we will honk, and we will honk until freedom improves. Thank you so much for watching and for your support and your patience while I was gone. This is hopefully me saying that I'm officially back, unless YouTube deletes me immediately for making this video. Either way, have a great night. Meow!